Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 445 for the 30th of April 2017. Richard Saunders here with you from a delightful, warm, sunny Sydney, Australia. Beside me here on the mixing desk is Skeptic Zone intern Henrietta the cat. She's just sort of lying there helping me, pointing things out, operating the levels this week, aren't you, Henrietta? Coming up on this week's Skeptic Zone, we're going to kick off with an interview with an old skeptical buddy of mine, Ben Radford, all the way from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Ben has a new podcast. Yes, there's a new skeptical podcast in town, Squaring the Strange. And when it comes to skeptical experience, hands-on investigation, Ben Radford is your man. He brings a wealth of knowledge to the podcast. It's a brand new podcast, only a few episodes out so far. We're going to find out all about it and about Ben's next book about ghost hunting from a skeptical point of view. That's Ben Radford to kick off this week's Skeptic Zone. Following that, it's Brew Ha Ha Science from AustraliaScience.tv with Kelly Wong. This week, Kelly's going to be telling us about the, some of you may have seen this, a lamb growing in a fake or an artificial uterus. Wow, interesting stuff. And what are the potential repercussions or advantages for premature babies? That's Brew Ha Ha coming up a bit later on. Then a slightly different sort of report. We're going to be diving into the archives of the Sydney Morning Herald newspaper. Now, it's really fantastic that these things slowly, bit by bit, are being digitized and searchable. And we're going to be looking at some of the comments and reviews made about James Randi's visit here in the year 1980, where he conducted a series of very famous water dividing tests, and was also kicked off the chat show, The Don Lane Show, where the host, Don Lane, who also had on his show at various times people like Uri Geller and the long since deceased so-called medium Doris Stokes. Well, when Randi came on, Don Lane got very annoyed and kicked him off. So that's sort of mixed up too in all these reviews. And in fact, we're going to be playing an audio clip of a news report of the time made that the day after James Randi was kicked off the Don Lane Show. So news and reviews from 1980 coming up a bit later on in the show. Then to round off the show, we catch up with Maynard and Tim Ferguson, the award-winning Maynard and Tim Ferguson. And we're going to find out what they've been up to since winning the Castaway Podcast Awards a few weeks ago. And listeners will remember that we played a clip of Maynard accepting the prize, the first prize, the winning prize. I don't know what you say, the winner is, for his Planet Maynard podcast, including Bunga Bunga. So we have a fun chat with Maynard and Tim Ferguson to round off this week's episode. Now, I'm quite excited. I think I've got all my little ducks lined up, so to speak. Looks like I'm off to New York a bit later on in the year to attend the Northeast Conference of Science and Skepticism with my friends like the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe and lots of friends I've made over the years. I hope that I can contribute when I'm there in some small way to the convention as a whole, but really I'm going there to be just part of the fun and the interest. See James Randi. Interview James Randi? Why not? In fact, I might be interviewing James Randi before then. I'm chasing him on the internet at the moment, where we're sort of the old classic tag team calling. What do they call it? Where you call somebody and they call you back, but you miss the call and you call anyway. It'll be great to see all those people once again, and hopefully, in my own small way, contribute to the fun of that convention. More about that coming up, and I'll be obviously, I guess, promoting that, as I do any skeptical convention. Now, if you're in Sydney this week, this Thursday at the Occidental Hotel near Wynyard, it's Skeptics in the Pub, and this week promises to be very interesting The guest is a chiropractor. Going to be telling us all about chiropractic. This should make for an interesting night. I'll put a link on the show notes if you're in Sydney. Thursday night, free for all. Just come along at the Occidental near Wynyard Station. But now it's time for me to kick Henrietta the cat off the mixing desk. Oh, she's gone. Cats do that. They suddenly disappear and they suddenly reappear. It's time for me to then run downstairs, have a look on the oven and see if I have some vegetable soup left simmering away. Vegetable soup, oldie but a goodie with a bit of toast. A bit of sourdough, that's my favourite bread. Lovely toasty sourdough. Cut that up into strips and dunk that into the vegetable soup. Sounds pretty good to me. While I'm enjoying that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. And joining me now all the way from that famous spot, made famous, of course, by Bugs Bunny, where he should have turned left, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, it's my old skeptical friend and comrade in investigations, Ben Radford. Hello, Ben.
Hello there, Richard. Great to talk to you.
Yes, it's been a little while since you've been on the Skeptic Zone. I'm going to kick off straight away, folks, by saying that I'm really cutting my own throat here, in talking to Ben, because we're going to be promoting his new skeptical podcast, which will probably take all the listeners away from me.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. There's more than enough hours in the day to listen to everybody.
Well, I certainly hope so. But if they had to go somewhere, I'd be pleased if they go to your new podcast. It's called Squaring the Strange. I'm just looking at the website now, which is squaringthestrange.wordpress.com, and there's certainly a link to coming up in the show notes. What an impressive-looking website it is. My goodness me, I'll have to revamp my website after looking at this website. Please tell me all about this new podcast and tell me about your co-host.
I will. Thank you. Yes, I'm pretty excited about it. My co-host is a guy named Pascual Romero, who I've known for several years, and he's also a podcast veteran. He was on several podcasts, including a podcast called 16 Miles to Hell, and several others. He's a musician, entertainer, and down-home, homegrown skeptic. He's from here in New Mexico, and so we just sort of crossed paths, and we both, of course, had an interest in skepticism and I had ever since I left Monster Talk a few years ago, I'd had people encouraging me to sort of get back into the podcasting and I enjoyed it, but it was just a lot of work and to be frank, I'm not that smart in terms of tech savvy. I don't really have the production skills. And on Monster Talk, that mostly was left to Blake Smith. And in this particular case, my co-host Pascual has extensive production skills, and so the arrangement that we have is that he'll take care of the heavy lifting, and I'll take care of the other stuff, and together we make a pretty good team.
It looks like it, folks. When you look at the website, there's a wonderful caricature of you both. In fact, there's the huge banner. Done in a green, sort of mysterious, and you've got monsters behind you, and there's Loch Ness Monster I can see, and the Bigfoot, UFOs, and a clown. Listen, before we go any further, what's the latest on these weird, scary, evil, bad clowns? Have they gone away?
Well, the latest, yeah, well, they're still around in a bit. It was odd, as you know, about a year ago. In fact, a year ago of this month. My book Bad Clowns came out. It was, on April Fool's Day, actually. No fooling. And within about 6 months, I despite sideways glances to the contrary, I was not behind the creepy clown scares that circulated around the world, despite what some skeptics may think. But yeah, it was very, very odd because, they're right around Halloween and a bit after. there are these creepy clown scares across the states, and in fact, around the world. And there were even some in Sydney, and I was on a radio station there as well.
Yes.
So just everywhere. And so it faded away mostly soon after Halloween. However, there's still a couple tricklings every now and then, because I have a Google Alerts news alert for clowns, as one does. And I would say, about twice a month there's some sort of weird clown story comes up. And that's especially true these days because there's a film remake of Stephen King's It, which had his famous Pennywise the Clown, originally portrayed in the TV miniseries by Tim Curry. So that's soon to be out, and that will of course promote and provoke interest in evil clowns once again.
Yes, I well remember you being on Sydney radio. It eludes me. It was sometime last year when this was all a craze, and I think you and I had a chat at the time, and we were saying that these things come and go. It can't be too long before everybody forgets about evil clowns and starts concentrating on the next fad or craze.
Yes, definitely. And that's pretty much what happened after Halloween. It sort of faded away. Although, as I wrote in my book, some of these clown scares, they're recurring events. And so, the fact is that we have not seen the last of these evil clowns. I guarantee you that this next Halloween, there will be at least a few sightings of scary clowns, just sort of in typical copycat fashion. I don't think it'll be anything remotely approaching what we saw last year, but people being what they are and people enjoying attention as much as they do, there's sure to be a few miscreants out there who are happy to don the grease paint and scare people.
I'm sure that's going to be happening. In fact, I think that's what I'm lined up for later tonight. Bring the craze back. Now, let's get back to this podcast. So I just having a quick look again at the site. I notice you have 3 episodes out already. First episode, Hi, Hello, Hoaxes. Second episode, What We Are Skeptical About. And the third one, Psychic. So are you intending to more or less stick to the tried and true skeptical themes, or are you going to look further afield?
Well, that's an interesting question. When we were talking about doing the podcast, I was very aware that there's honestly, there's too many podcasts, and I don't mean that in a bad way. There's just such a wide variety, and of course, it just exploded. And even the skeptical podcasts, there's so many of them out there. Many of them excellent. Yours included, and of course, there's Sharon Hill has 15 Credibility Street and SGU and Skeptical. I mean, there's just so much stuff out there, and so. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and so it was important to Pascual and I that we try and do something different and find a niche. And that's sort of what Blake Smith and I originally did with Monster Talk, which of course won a Parsec at one point. And we found a niche that wasn't really being served, and then sort of delved into that. And so what we're trying to do with the new podcast is sort of go beyond just it's not just about monsters or ghosts or chupacabras or conspiracy theories, but we want to go broader than that. And so, I'll be talking and we'll be talking about the news media, and really applying skepticism and critical thinking much more broadly than is often the case with a lot of the skeptical podcasts. And so, that's sort of the angle we wanted to go with, bring in psychology and myths and folklore and science and all these different angles to it that were sort of maybe missing from some of the public discourse.
And what is the format of your show? Is it just like a fireside chat, or do you have reports? How does that work?
Well, we're basically it's a fairly simple format. We're still sort of hammering out the details, as you noted. We're still in the first half dozen episodes, and so we're trying to. We don't have the polished delivery that you do, and Maynard. I every time I see Maynard, number one, I just love his face because it looks like it was just done by a caricaturist. But you two are just such entertainers. I'm always just jealous that we don't have your skills, but. basically the format of the show is we begin each show by asking each other what we're skeptical of recently or that week. And we don't discuss it with the other person ahead of time. So, actually Pascual lives fairly near here. And so we can actually go into the studio together. And, we don't want to spend too much time on it, but maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And if there's something relatively recent that's been occurring over the past few days or a week or so, we sort of, bring that up. And again, not necessarily something that you would think of as down the mainstream skeptical angle. So it may or may not have ghosts or psychic detectives or whatever else. It could be something much broader, like, for example, in the media. And then the second part of the show is sort of the meat of it. And that's where we sort of dig deeper into a specific topic that may be anywhere from maybe 20 minutes to 40 minutes or an hour, depending on where we go with it. And sometimes we might be talking, for example, about psychic detectives. We recently just taped a 2-part series on Jamaican folklore. I was recently in Jamaica, and so I had a fun time relating some of the research that I'd done, both in archives and also on the ground in Jamaica, talking about ghost stories and duppy stories and these interesting island folklore that I'd looked into. And so we sort of dig deeper into that. And then we have a couple sort of smaller throwaway things. We have something that we call fan mail, which is not always fan mail. In fact, often it's crank mail. But it's all in good fun. And every now and then we read a listener's question or whatever else, and we may throw in a pop quiz or two. So it's a weekly show, and we just hope that people will sort of get into it and enjoy it.
I'm sure they will. A weekly show, you fool! Get out while you still can. A weekly show. Oh boy! Welcome to the world of weekly podcasting. That's a lot of fun. Now I'm really looking for. I've only just discovered this myself. Much to my shame, I should have been more on top of these matters. But I'm certainly going to indulge myself over the next few days and enjoy the first few episodes of your show. Because apart from anything else, it's nice to know that you're back on the air, because your wealth of skeptical knowledge gained at your great age by now, I should add. I mean, what are you, 92?
Thank you, Richard.
No, I mean that in wisdom, of course. Your skeptical wisdom, it must be equal to 92.
Hold on, let me reach for my prune juice here. There we go. Go ahead.
You feel better now?
I do. It'll take a while to kick in, but I'll be fine.
Shall I speak up? Is it all right? Now So yes, that's very exciting. I'm very pleased. Oh, by the way, I noticed you can listen to the episodes right off the website. Is that show also on something like iTunes or something like that?
It is. It's on iTunes. It's on the website. And we do have a Patreon set up in case people want to support the show. Initially, there was a little bit of support from the Center for Inquiry, and that may or may not be continuing. But certainly, as of now, it's mostly a labor of love, and we appreciate any listeners or feedback or reviews or anything we can get.
Well, I'm sure people will be having a look, and more importantly, having a listen very soon. In fact, folks, why don't I play just a moment of the podcast now to give you a flavor?
Welcome to Squaring the Strange, where we apply critical thinking and evidence-based analysis to, everything from the simple to the strange, the mysterious to the mundane.
Welcome to Squaring the Strange. I'm Pascual Romero, and with me, as always, is
Ben Radford.
And we are here on the first episode, the maiden voyage of Squaring the Strange. So I figure best thing we can do right now is introduce ourselves. So, Ben, who are you? Who is Ben Radford? What makes you tick?
Why are you in my house, in my studio, you weirdo? I'm Ben Radford. I'm a writer. I'm also the deputy editor for Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine, which is, of course, published by the Center for Inquiry. I've probably best known for doing investigations into all manner of weirdness, ranging from chupacabras to crop circles and ghosts, evil clowns. Oddly enough, I've become an expert, world expert on evil clowns over the past year or so. Actually, 1 year ago.
So that's a little taste of Squaring the Strange. It sounds great. As I say, I haven't heard all the show yet, but I look forward to doing that. That'll be my next podcast on the list. But more skeptical adventures await with Ben Radford. Ben, what's this about a ghost book?
A ghost book?
A ghost book, yeah.
Yes. My next book, my 11th book, but who's counting, is on investigating ghosts. And it's sort of a follow-up to a book that I did about, probably 5 years ago at this point, called Scientific Paranormal Investigation, How to Solve Unexplained Mysteries. And in that book, I cover a pretty broad array of claims and how to investigate them, ranging from crop circles to lake monsters and ghosts and psychics and this and that and the other. And it was a mildly successful book. I'm happy with it, and many people have sort of pointed to it as being helpful to them when doing their own investigations. I'm quite proud of it, but I realized that after a while that ghosts are a really unique topic. That there's so much that's specific to ghost investigation, particularly, that wasn't really covered in my book, just because I couldn't. It was necessarily broad because I'm covering a lot of different things. And so I realized, here I am. I'd done many, many ghost investigations firsthand and researched it in the psychology and the forensics and all sorts of things. And I realized that, I had all this material, much of which hadn't been published before. And so I decided to go ahead and compile that material and add to it, of course, and put out a book specifically on ghosts and ghost investigating. And so, there's plenty of books on ghosts from a believer point of view, and there's lots of ghosts on ghost stories and ghost folklore. But as far as I know, there's no real books on ghost hunting specifically, from a skeptical point of view. Joe Nichols done a book, and Massimo Polidoro and others, but none on specifically on the history of ghost hunting, the right ways, the wrong ways, and the phenomenology. And that's what I wanted to sort of put out there. And so that's what my next book is out. And hopefully it'll be out around September, October.
Does it have a title?
It does. The title is Investigating Ghosts, The Scientific Search for Spirits.
That sounds great. I will put my hand up, my name down, and my foot down for an early copy of that for review. That sounds really good. I like that old stuff. In fact, not so long ago, and Skeptic Zone fans may remember a couple of months ago here on the show that we did a live report or a field report from a ghost tour here in Sydney. I still like all that sort of graveyard, sort of creeping around ghosty sort of stuff. It's good. It's good old-fashioned skepticism, isn't it?
It really is, and that's one thing I like about it is it's such a classic mystery. Not everybody believes in Bigfoot or Yowies or drop bears or psychics, but ghosts are another matter. I mean, ghosts are among the most widely believed paranormal topics in the world. And of course, the search for spirits in one form or another goes back centuries. You can look at the Society for Psychical Research in England, and Eusapia Palladino and Harry Price and all those other people. And so there really is a really fascinating, robust history of ghost investigation per se. And it's really interesting to go back and look at that and sort of see how that has informed modern ghost hunting, both good and bad.
Wow, it sounds like something that should be on the list, on the skeptical reading list as soon as it comes out. Folks, once again, the podcast is Squaring the Strange. It's even got its own Facebook site. You can check that out.
It's just a fun show. Pascual and I are together on it, and we also have a great artist friend of mine, Celestia Ward, and she serves as a content producer, and so she helps pull it together. And we're pleased to have I think over 500 downloads so far just in the first few weeks. And, we're just going to keep putting it out there, and we hope that people enjoy it.
Well, Celestia is well known to the Skeptic Zone because she actually did a field report for us last week. And she also did the caricatures that Maynard and I use on our business cards. So another big shout out to her. She's one of the best caricature artists I've ever met. It's just fantastic stuff.
She is excellent. And yeah, I mean, to be fair, I mean, you know, caricaturing Maynard, I mean, it's, I mean, where do you go with that, right? It's just God's gift to caricature. And I mean that in the most loving way.
In a very nice way, of course. All good stuff coming from Ben Radford. Folks, check it out. It's Squaring the Strange, and that Facebook page is there waiting for you. And the website, of course, is squaringthestrange.wordpress.com. Ben, wonderful to catch up with you again. I've never made it to Albuquerque yet, but the day can't be too far away, I hope. Maybe in the next couple of years I might be able to find myself there. And I hope one day you can find yourself here in Sydney, Australia, and we can go out yowie hunting.
I would love to. I've always had a fondness for Australia, and I'd love to come see the continent sometime and just meet all the wonderful people there. Have many great friends and people who just have fallen in love with it. So hopefully one day.
We'll start rowing now. It's not that far.
I'll see what I can do. My arms are tired already.
Ben Radford, all the way from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Calling all Skeptic Zone listeners. Do you live in or near Glasgow, or are you planning to visit sometime? Then you're in luck, because the Glasgow Skeptics have got your Monday nights sorted. We're committed to filling up every available Monday night with talks on science and skepticism. Past speakers include Eugenie Scott, Jerry Coyne, Michael Marshall, Nate Phelps, Tom and Cecil from Cognitive Dissonance, P.Z. Myers, Richard Wiseman, A.C. Grayling, Noah Heath and Eli from The Scathing Atheist, Simon Singh, Rebecca Watson, and a multitude of local academics and skeptics. There's literally nothing better you can do on a Monday night in Glasgow that doesn't involve taking your clothes off. So come join us. We've also got a vibrant online community. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and get involved with the discussion. Glasgow Skeptics. Self-help for your brain.
And now, direct from the cafe at Australia's Science Channel, it's Brew Ha Ha with Kelly Wong.
The most incredible thing I've seen this week is a lamb growing inside an artificial womb. Researchers in the US have used a biobag to replicate a womb, full of amniotic fluids to develop a premature lamb. It might seem like something from the Matrix, but this is just a step towards giving premature human babies a fighting chance. If you think about it, it's just the next step up from the incubators we use currently. When they do use this for the first time on a preemie baby, it's going to be a big milestone for science. But it's going to be an even bigger emotional milestone for humanity. Think about how you've reacted to this lamb. Imagine if it was a human baby. Are you going to be ready for that visual? But then, what about further in the future? Will this form a new class of ex vivo humans or become the new normal? Could they eventually add in extra supplements into the artificial womb and create super babies with superpowers? Or more realistically, imagine if you could get all your vaccinations before you were born. Who knows what could happen, but what it definitely will do is give those fragile premies a chance at life. And there is plenty to think about until then.
For more Brew Ha Ha and Australian science, head for www.australiascience.tv. As mentioned on the Skeptic Zone over the last few weeks, and this is going to be stretching on, well, for a good part of this year, I think I've been doing a lot of skeptical research, diving into the archives, looking mostly for predictions and then doing some research to see whether psychic predictions over the last 17 years or so have actually come true. But along the way, of course, I've come across many articles relating to skeptics and skepticism, paranormal, that sort of thing. And I thought I would read out a couple of them here. And this one I'll begin with comes from 1980, so way back, from the Sydney Morning Herald. But why this is important is this is a review of the documentary James Randi in Australia. The request of Dick Smith, James Randi flew to Australia to conduct a series of water divining tests. Now, the documentary, which this article alludes to, has been on YouTube now for many years. I found a copy on a video cassette tape, 2001, 2002, something like that, and I digitized it, fixed it up a little bit, and we put that out. These tests are very important because it was one of the reasons that, one of the motivating factors that led to the formation of Australian skeptics. So the article, which has a huge picture of an imposing James Randi, taking the mystique out of the magical. James Randi in Australia, ATN7, that stands for Australian Television Network, Wednesday 8 p.m, previewed by Gary Shelley. James Randi, a psychic investigator from New York, does not believe in Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, or the Easter Bunny. Quote, "There is not enough evidence to support their existence," end quote, says the magician, who is not entirely humorless. Mr. Randi scoffs at any form of paranormal behaviour, from the bending of spoons to the searching for water by divining rod. He wants to, quote, "expose people who go out of their way to defraud others," end quote. At the same time, he would love to believe that these people could prove their supernatural powers scientifically. The name James Randi might ring a bell to many viewers. He was the gentleman whom Don Lane told to get lost, in liquefied form, when he exposed Uri Geller and Doris Stokes' frauds live. Mr. Randi was brought to Australia by Dick Smith in an attempt to prove or disprove the validity of water diviners and psychic surgeons. In the program, the investigator explains the skullduggery and chicanery exercised by the psychic surgeons in the Philippines, whose hands fumble in and out of stomachs of patients who pay thousands of dollars for treatment. It is not a pretty sight, as Randi demonstrates on a bewildered human guinea pig. With sleight of hand, he appears to draw out pieces of the man's innards, but they are only a handful of chicken livers. Water diviners also bear the brunt of Mr. Randi's expose. He conducts some experiments to test their extraordinary gift, with a reward of $30,000 for any person who can scientifically prove their powers. Each water diviner claimed to have unlimited success in the craft, and many make a good living from the man on the land. One codger was certain the test would be, quote, "easier than getting in and out of bed," end quote. The experiment, arranged in true show business fashion, had the Reverend Ted Knopfs and a priest, Father Drake, as official judges. However, God was not on the side of James Randi and Dick Smith, because both religious men actually believe in water divining. As well as divining for water, tests were made in the search for brass and gold objects. Out of 111 attempts, only 15 were successful, an average of about 11%. But not one merited the prize, which is still up for grabs. James Randi is convinced that the movement of the divining or dowsing rods is manipulated by the imagination or wishful thinking of the person operating it. Quote, "There is an enormous amount of harm in deception," end quote, he said. He gave, as an example, the Jonestown mass suicide in Guyana. There, the total belief in one man, whose charisma and power was so overwhelming, meant that death was the only salvation. Which I am sure is more than James Randi can say for Don Lane. And less than a week later in the Sydney Morning Herald, another article appears about James Randi, published on the 17th of October 1980. Randi's a wake-up to tricks of mediums. James Randi, the magician who made Don Lane disappear, used to be one of the psychic phonies he now debunks. He had a telepathy act that made him a star. But when distraught parents started pleading with him to find their lost children, he gave it away. Quote, "I couldn't live with that kind of lie," end quote, Randi explained later. Quote, "So I went back to conjuring rabbits," end quote. And he started crusading against the fakes and liars who pose as mediums and faith healers to make fortunes at the expense of human grief. Randi was 15 when he attended his first spiritualist meeting. Quote, "I saw all the conjuring tricks magicians use. I saw the little old ladies being taken in by it," end quote, he said. Quote, "I thought, one day I am going to have enough authority to expose these people," end quote. These days, Randi, one of America's top magicians, has that authority. On the Don Lane show last week, he criticised spoonbender Uri Geller and Doris Stokes, the ubiquitous grandmotherly medium who claims to communicate beyond the grave. Lane, who has several times had Mrs. Stokes on his show, leapt heartily to her defence. Finally, sweeping Randi's props from the table, Lane told the magician to pee ... off. Then, abracadabra, the comedian stormed off his own show. Challenge. It wasn't exactly the best example of the lanky Yank's wit. Indeed, Randi himself tends to be funnier. He has compared Doris Stokes with Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny. And he issued her with a rare challenge. A wrestling match to the death, nude in mud. Not surprisingly, Mrs. Stokes found the offer one she could refuse. More to the point, though, she has also resisted invitations to perform her Calling Up the Dead act under Randi's relentless gaze. Randi was brought to Australia by three well-known skeptics: electronics millionaire Dick Smith, writer Philip Adams, and TV current affairs reporter Richard Carlton. His original brief was to pour cold water on water and metal diviners, which he succeeded in doing without attracting the publicity he had hoped for. Randi and his three backers offered $40,000 for any diviner who could find hidden water, brass and bars of gold. All 10 entrants failed, recording a success rate of just 11%. Yet the tests were virtually unreported in the media. As Randi put it, quote, "If Hitler's alive and well in Argentina, it's a story. If he's dead and gone, no story," end quote. Ben's Spoons. The 52-year-old Canadian-born magician has written 3 books. 2 of them, The Magic of Uri Geller and Flim Flam, The Truth About Unicorns, Parapsychology and Other Delusions, claims to expose the sleights of hand used by those who claim to have supernatural power. One of his acts is to bend spoons the way Geller did, by illusion, not by the power of the mind. He claims his strange encounter with Don Lane's was a setup. Quote, "Lane's ratings have depended a good deal on people like Doris Stokes. I think she's a favourite of his, and he believed I was attacking her, which she justly deserves to be," end quote. Randi flew back to the United States on Wednesday, still puzzled at the way Australians have taken to Mrs. Stokes. But his experience hasn't affected his sense of humour. Indeed, he spent almost as much time taking the mickey out of his friend Dick Smith. Hearing of the eccentric millionaire's plans to retrace Scott's path across the Antarctic, Randi asked Smith, quote, "Will you drop electronic toilet seats for them?" end quote. And seeing Smith having his photograph taken again, Randi noted dryly, quote, "Dick gets his tan from strobes and flashlights," end quote. And now we skim forward to the 9th of November 1980, an article in the Sydney Morning Herald by Don Groves. "When seeing isn't believing." Don Lane and believers in the divining rod, spoon bending and psychic surgery should watch the special James Randi in Australia. Quote, "Paranormal nonsense, claptrap and flummery," end quote, says Mr. Randi, as he convincingly demonstrates how easily people can fool the more gullible among us, and themselves. Mr. Lane should watch Channel 7 at 7:30 on Wednesday night to hear the cogent arguments he would not allow Mr. Randi to expound on his show. Devotees of the Lane program will recall the evening the compere, had the ill grace to swear at his guest and storm off the set after Randi had raised doubts about Doris Stokes, whom he calls, quote, the granny who hears dead people talking to her, end quote. In a statement issued through his Australian sponsor, Dick Smith, the scientist says he's certain Lane's actions were a, quote, calculated setup, end quote. Randi says he doesn't believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. For the same reason he can't cop ESP, spoon-bending and the rest. Insufficient evidence. And just as an aside from me, it's interesting the use of this term ESP. As I've been going through the archives all these years, there is an odd sort of line, a border in time, where before this vague time, maybe in the late 70s, early 80s, the term ESP was used to cover just about everything paranormal. That has morphed, that has evolved now. Instead of ESP, the most common term is psychic. So instead of this person has ESP powers, the term now would be this person is a psychic. But certainly when I was growing up, ESP was the popular term, which is, of course, extrasensory perception. We read on. Here's evidence in the Doubting Thomas view places all things paranormal firmly in the Easter Bunny class. It would be a pity if he lost most of his viewers in the first few minutes as he appeared to remove a quantity of blood and guts from a willing victim's stomach. It isn't psychic surgery, but sleight of hand. By a similar trick, he bends spoons in the slickest, faster-than-the-eye Uri Geller fashion. The clincher takes place in a field in Ryde. Another aside, Ryde is a Sydney suburb, not very far from the centre of the city really, but in 1980 there was certainly more open land there. We read on. Where the reputations of a group of water diviners are left looking a little tattered. Attracted by an offer of $40,000, $10,000 from each of the skeptics, Randi, Smith, Philip Adams and Richard Carlton, the dowsers had to identify gold and brass hidden in cardboard boxes, and which out of 10 pipes had water flowing through it. Before the experiment, most said they would be 100% successful. 5 agreed to split the proceeds, they were so confident. In this case, seeing is disbelieving. The results are no better than chance or guesswork, and Randi declares, quote, it would seem to indicate that dowsing as a force does not exist, end quote. Does this shake the faith of our dowsers? Not a bit. They come up with every excuse under the sun, including sunspots, to explain away this rare lapse. People, Randi concludes sadly, simply will not learn a lesson. And now to illustrate some of what we've been chatting about, some of those reports, here is a TV news report made the day after the famous Don Lane and James Randi incident.
It's Don Lane's show involving Canadian magician James Randi. During the interview, Don Lane clashed angrily with Mr. Randi.
This is the interview that had most of Australia talking today. Canadian magician James Randi has written a number of books claiming people who profess to have supernatural powers, such as spoonbender Uri Geller and medium Doris Stokes, are nothing more than magicians themselves.
You go against a lady like Doris Stokes, who never harmed anybody in her whole life, and you call her a charlatan and a fake?
You know a great deal about it.
Yes, I do. You said that she was a liar on the radio. You called her a liar.
No.
And that woman wouldn't lie to anybody. And I don't know whether she's right or wrong, but she wouldn't lie to anybody. We're going for a commercial break, and you can... We'll be back with Diana Trapp.
Don stormed off the set. This morning he offered a public apology for using bad language, but he maintained his behaviour towards Randi was correct.
What other program has he gone on where he has been really challenged by anyone, either verbally or any other way, asking him, what are you talking about? Where is the proof? I said, where's the proof? He says, I got film. I said, where's the film? He says, not here.
Any regrets about the incident?
No, I don't have any regrets at all. I've said publicly and to the staff as well that the release that we put out was, I'm perfectly willing to have the man on the program, and I will publicly apologize to him if he can prove that what he's saying is right. If he shows us some sort of documentary proof, other than just bringing his mouth into this country and running around making a big deal out of himself, denigrating everybody in sight.
Don Lane died a few years back now, but since 1980, and several occasions, he actually made a more formal apology to James Randi, and I think James Randi accepted that. It's certainly given James Randi a tall tale to tell for many, 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 many years now since that famous incident. But there you go. There are a swag of reports, a grab bag of reports from 1980 revolving James Randi's visit to Australia, primarily to conduct the water divining tests, and I'm so pleased that Dick Smith at the time had the nous to commission a video to be made of it, a TV special. And of course that trip was probably, in fact definitely, more well known in Australian television history for the spat that Don Lane had with James Randi live on air. Links to those news reports and to the videos in the show notes. The Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian skeptics. Subscribe online to the world's second oldest skeptical magazine. Visit www.skeptics.com.au and click the publications link. You can also find there over 30 years of back issues free to download. The Skeptic, the magazine from Australian skeptics. Well, I'm here at the Madame Frou Frou Cafe in Glebe with Maynard, Tim Ferguson and Louise. Hello, everybody. Maynard and Tim were just doing a Bunga Bunga podcast recording, the award-winning Maynard podcast, and I said to the Skeptic Zone listeners I'd update them as to what Maynard's been up to since winning the award. Maynard, what's it like to be the winner of that award?
Well, look, Tim and I have been doing what we call a victory lap. Some people could call it potentially borderline illegal exposure. But what are we doing? I've been pushing you around Glebe here. Yeah, we've been waving to people. We've been just going, hello. We won the Castaway Award as we walk past them and they go, what'd that person say?
Yeah, that's right. We won the Castaway Award and all of my friends are very impressed. They didn't think Bunga Bunga was a thing. But as soon as you win a prize, it's like, oh, so it's an actual thing.
That's like my dad. Suddenly my dad's all in with podcasting because we won an award and I let him put it on his mantelpiece.
Yeah, we're the first to win an award for doing what we do.
Yeah, so we're not quite sure. We're obviously going places with this, Richard. I would expect we could be going as far as Tail and Bend, somewhere like that.
What I like, Maynard, is the fact that was the inaugural Castaway Awards.
Yes.
And the very first award was Bunga Bunga, or Planet Maynard, and you were the very first person in the history of the awards to get up there and accept an award. That was pretty cool.
Yes, and I only libelled, I think, 6 people. Yes. 6 people in under a minute. I thank Tim as part of the Holy Trinity. I think you were the Father and Son. You might have been the Holy Ghost.
Look, I was in there like Flynn. I just can't remember who it was. It was all happening at once.
Oh, look, yes. And so, also Tim's under a bit of an injury cloud too, you must understand at the moment, Richard, because he was sitting at home the other night and I texted him something. I texted him, UK election called. And Tim, you thought...
Well, I thought there was a punchline coming, so I sat back and relaxed for at least a quarter of an hour, maybe half an hour, because I was thinking UK election called, they want your bow tie back. Or there'll be some kind of punchline, but it turns out that the UK election had been called, no bow tie needed.
And as I mentioned earlier in Bunga Bunga, how sad would you be when you've got to get your current affairs news from me, Tim?
Well, yeah, when you sent me that thing, why did the chicken cross the road, I assumed it was rhetorical.
Yeah, so basically we are making out like bandits is the answer to what we've done since we won the Castaway Award. And thank you to yourself for all the filming on the night. Have a look on the Castaway Awards Facebook page, because I did lots of red carpet interviews with various podcasters from around Australia.
It's quite a record, isn't it? You on the red carpet. We shot almost an hour of video in the end, which was quite something, especially since I was doing it with a makeshift rig and an iPhone, but it worked very well. So I'll put a link to those interviews in the show notes. But again, and I know you do this in Bunga Bunga, and I certainly do it in the Skeptic Zone, we thank the people who support the show.
That's right. And by the way, you're listening to the Skeptic Zone right now. Why not hit the tin, get onto Patreon, just sling Richard $1 or $2 or something just to help the show out, because this guy is doing it day in, day out. He's got kittens to feed.
Well, they're big cats now, but yes, that cat food ain't cheap.
Yeah, exactly. He's got plastic boxes to buy for them. You've got all sorts of expensive things, haven't you?
Well, they're the interns for the Skeptic Zone. They do most of the work, in fact. Henrietta and Maud, yeah.
And of course, as you heard this, the March for Science would have been on. I'm marching for science. I'm not quite sure which branch of science I'm going to be marching for. I thought maybe geology would be kind of cool. I don't know. Well, what branch of science would you march for, Tim?
Oh, man, it's got to be the table of elements. Of course, it's not here forever, it's just periodic. So while we've got it, I reckon we just celebrate it and then we'll just push it off in a little boat and, and say, well, carbon, who knew it would be a thing?
Let's hear it for gallium.
Yeah, gallium, good old gallium, always giving, and aluminium. Why isn't it there?
So folks, that's the award-winning Maynard and Tim Ferguson from the Bunga Bunga podcast. But congratulations, both of you. An award is great.
Yeah, look, and thank you for your help with it too there, Richard. And we now return you to your normal programming after a word from Tim Ferguson.
A friend of mine had a girlfriend who came up and looked at the periodic table of elements in his kitchen and peered at it and said, "Where's energy?" He said, well, it's not there. She said, but energy's real. He said, well, it's a combination of those elements. No, it's not. And that's how she became single.
A warning from history from Tim Ferguson.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and I'm very excited, and I hope I can see some Skeptic Zone fans at the Northeast Conference of Science and Skepticism a bit later on at the end of June. End of June, beginning of July. I've never been to New York, and I've never been to, I think the furthest east I've been in the United States would be Atlanta, Georgia, I think, many years ago when I used to go to the Dragon Con convention. But that's all many weeks away. Coming up next week on the Skeptic Zone, it's up to Maud and Henrietta, the interns. I'll ask them. I mean, what sort of skeptical topics would interest pussycats? Somehow they're not telling me. I think they're skeptical about everything. In fact, I think coming up next week we'll probably have a report of the skeptics in the pub night with our chiropractor giving us a lecture. That should be very interesting. And hopefully, if I can track him down, we might even have a chat to James Randi, at least soon, I hope. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders, Maud and Henrietta, who have disappeared once again, signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter @SkepticZone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation. You're still in New Mexico, I take it?
I am. Is my audio okay?
Yes, it's very good. Where exactly are you in New Mexico?
I'm just outside of Albuquerque, as you would say. It's we're probably best known for Bugs Bunny and Breaking Bad.
I knew I should have turned left at Albuquerque.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Same. Cultural references, we know it. Hang on, am I recording? Okay, let's just wing it, Ben. See how we go.
We can do it. We're professionals. Or at least you are.
Well, I'm glad one of us is. And joining me now all the way from that famous spot, made famous, of course, by Bugs Bunny, where he should have turned.